So the Daily Mail doing a good job today. Their front page, 19 suspected terrorists have crossed the English Channel in dinghies and are living in 4-star hotels. Well, that's 19 we know about. As I warned 3 years ago, right at the start of this, when I was going out into the English Channel during lockdown, getting in trouble for doing so, I said two things. Number one, that the numbers that came would be absolutely enormous. And number two, this would pose a threat to national security. Why? Because of the huge number of undocumented young males coming from war zones, coming from all sorts of areas. But actually, the problem goes back further. It goes back to 2015, when I was in the European Parliament and the boats started crossing the Mediterranean. The EU put in place the EU asylum system, and that said anyone that set foot on EU soil could stay. Then Mrs. Merkel encouraged even more to come. At that point, ISIS said they would use the Mediterranean route to get their operatives into Europe. And hey, just a few months before, we'd seen the atrocities in Paris, where of the 8 men that committed mass murder on that scale, 5 of them had crossed the Mediterranean on a boat. So I'm not in the least bit surprised that we have people living in this country that are genuine ISIS suspects. Add to that, goodness knows how many hundreds of other criminals. And you begin to realise the conversation we're having here is the wrong one. Why? Because the first duty of government is actually to protect the country and to protect its citizens. I haven't heard a dicky bird out of Gary Lineker or any of the other left-wing commentators this morning, all of whom seem to think that everyone that crosses the Channel somehow is a poor refugee. Here's the other irony. We've got a government telling us they're going to stop the boats, and yet millions of pounds of funding every year for all sorts of refugee charities that think as many people as want to come should be able to. You ask yourself a serious question. Is Rishi genuinely going to get a grip of this? What's even worse? What's even worse than 19 suspected terrorists being in Britain? And I bet that's a fraction. I bet that's a fraction of the genuine number. What's even worse is we won't be able to deport any of them. And do you know why? Because we're still a member of the European Convention on Human Rights with its court in Strasbourg. And if any of these people are sent back to countries into which they've been suspects, well, they could be subjected to harsh punishments. So we'd rather risk terrorist outrages in our own country occurring from these young men than send them back to where they come from. That to me is a complete abdication of the responsibility of the British government. And unless and until I hear Rishi Sunak say we're going to leave the ECHR, I will not take a single word they say seriously. 1,000 people came just in the last few days over the English Channel. When the weather improves in May or June or July, whenever it is, you can expect tens of thousands more to come. And among their number will be suspected terrorists. Don't say from the start I didn't warn you.